Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great webinar from Reuters Events. This one is about making that last step count, mastering digital claims payments for superior customer experience. That's the payment. It's that moment of truth, the final moment of truth that you often get in a claim. So you want to make sure that all the hard work up until that point isn't thrown away with how we have our customers go through the payment process. I'm sure so many of you have great war stories of everyone going over and above, and then what happens in that last moment, and is that all that they're left thinking about? So we're going to get into that today. This is a fantastic way to kick off the claims discussion that will be building up to this November. Connected Claims 2021 is coming November 16th through 18th, virtually just launched today. So you guys are getting this hot off the press. This webinar is how we're launching the whole thing. So of course, watch your inbox or LinkedIn or social media for more information, so you also can sign up for Connected Claims. You don't want to miss it. I'm Brian Falchuk. I'm your moderator and host today. I'm the managing partner of Insurance Evolution Partners and the author of the book series, The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Evolution. And this has certainly been a time of both of those things, disruption and evolution recently. I'm joined by a great panel today. We have Angela Delude, who is the head of claims strategy at MassMutual. We have Jim Burdick, who's a senior business development manager for Deluxe, and John Thornton, who's a claims strategy leader at Westfield Insurance. With that, what I want to do is jump into some opening thoughts from our panelists, and then we're going to move into Q&A, which is only useful if all of you ask your questions. So you will see a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It's so important that you ask what you care about and you want to hear about, because that's what guides what we discuss. We will be answering your questions for the bulk of this conversation. You don't have to wait to do that. For when the opening remarks are done, you can ask those questions at any point. If something occurs to you, throw it in there. I just ask you to use the Q&A and not the chat, so we can manage it appropriately and make sure we get to your questions. So with that, I'd love for Angela, if you don't mind opening things off, some thoughts from your perspective at MassMutual as you think about this claims payments and superior customer experience that we've all been striving for. Love to hear your thoughts to kick things off.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Brian. So much to say on this, right? And watching some of the previous episodes, just all this building around, this digital experience, right? And again, delivering on the ultimate promise. At MassMutual, our strategy for claims is to really deliver, right, a personalized and exceptional experience when it matters most. And we try to do that looking at it from what we call our SET model, a speed, efficiency, and transparency kind of way of looking at the customer experience. And, the digital experience has been quite a journey for us. It's been really a multi-year journey as we really are doing a lot of transformational work. We have our life, disability, and annuity core products, as well as long-term care that we have in our organization. And I would say we're at different levels of maturity within the digital experience. But our bread and butter, right, our beneficiaries is really the heavy vision work that we currently have underway. And, when I think about that, we're very, very heavily reliant on our voice of customer. When we think about what it takes to really inform the direction that we should be heading in, even prior to building digital capabilities, obviously we are craving kind of what are our customers, thinking about, throughout this experience, what are the capabilities that they are seeking. We often know, as an insurance industry, that we don't get compared to other insurance experiences. We get compared to the Amazons, the Googles, the great shopping experiences online. So we're always wondering, and always craving kind of what are our customers looking for, and how do we offer that personalized and exceptional experience. And I'll start with saying that the voice of customer team that we have here at MassMutual is really strong. The software that we're using, we're investing more with text analytics. That's been really informational for us lately, because as you all can imagine, probably experience, similar challenges. It's your surveys are only as good as what you're asking, and then your response rates, right? So it's kind of like sometimes it can be too generic. And I think what we're learning is that as we move more and more towards digital maturity, we really have to make sure that we're always looking back at what our voice of customer surveys are asking, and making sure that are we getting the right information, right? So there is the I'll call it the digital IT side of the house that is really focused on clicking, where people are getting hung up on, the more technical side of, it operating well. The business is obviously very focused on our customers having a great experience. It's not to say that both of us, both sides of the house, both technology and business don't care about, of course, those shared experiences. But I think, for rightfully so, we have a different area of focus at times. And I think we're just keeping each other honest along the way, to make sure that, the way that our digital partners are planning on building an experience is matching what we're hearing on the business side, whether it's anecdotal feedback on the phone, it's escalations, right? Things of that nature. So we tend to focus a lot on the overall payment experience. And that can be measured through timeliness, effectiveness, right? The empathetic, right, portion of the experience. So our examiners, really, ensuring that they're taking the time to kind of meet that customer where they are. So there's just a lot that goes into that voice of customer, survey. We're a blend right now of paper and digital and surveys, and we're learning a lot even from that experience. It's interesting to see the lag and kind of the administration of reaching out to somebody that maybe got paid 3 months ago versus reaching out to somebody that is actually like currently in the experience still, right? Maybe hasn't even received a payment yet. So I think all of that, those are really salient data points that you need to be able to be thinking about as you look to evolve, whether you're building out your first digital pay experience or you're looking to mature that digital pay experience. And again, for our organization, we're in different places depending on the line of business there. I also think that there's always the risk of, where is the industry at, right? So when I think about, just digital pay capabilities, that's evolving, right? That is, evolving constantly. And I think, for us, it's, there's lately for us, what's bogging us down internally is at times making sure that we are taking the necessary measures from a fraud perspective with things like bank validation. That's really important for us to be able to capture that information, obviously, and protect, the customer and also protect Mass Mutual. But that is, it's another layer, right, of being able to, when we think about building out a digital experience, we want to make that as seamless as possible. Where right now, a lot of what we're doing is kind of behind the scenes manual, and managing through that is, we're hearing on our surveys is at times, it's clunky. If we can't get a hold of somebody, we have to drop to a check that may not be where they started, right? So if they're requesting an EFT transaction, but we have to drop to a check because something failed and that bank account validation, that's a big deal, right? And that, I think, again, we're constantly looking ahead to understand, even though we're not hearing maybe at times directly on surveys that maybe can't believe a Fortune 100 company, for example, is not offering, PayPal or Venmo or some other creative way of, of paying. Even though we're not hearing that, doesn't necessarily mean that if we offered it, that wouldn't be kind of a way to, make that experience even better. So I think as we look to evolve and mature our digital pay capabilities, I think these are the things we want to be asking about. And that goes back to that flexibility of the way we survey, being able to maybe put a targeted question around there to say, hey, if we did offer X, Y, and Z, would that, would you take us up on that? Would that delight you? And so I think it's just kind of like looking at it as a leading indicator versus we tend to, when we survey, look at like what we have now and, and how did that go? So I think there's an opportunity to start kind of infusing kind of like future state of where we want to head and also measuring, obviously, their current experience.
There's so many things I was like, I want to capture that because I want to ask you about it. You've already sparked questions, which is great, which is also a subtle hint to the audience to keep asking questions. But this point of alignment, I think, is really critical, and I'm sure is going to come up more. You talk about the alignment with the customer and using the voice of the customer to get that, looking at the text that's coming in and what insights can you pull so that you don't get into we built it and no one comes kind of moment. But the internal alignment is also critical because people are customers across different components of the business, and you want to make sure that you're not serving them perfectly in one side, as to what they wanted you to do, and in another, we're trying to catch up and maybe not meeting their needs there, and then we leave them feeling disjointed.
Yeah.
So how do you get the right alignment internally? These are all the things that as an industry, we're struggling with right now. So I appreciate you bringing all that up, Angela. Thank you for that. Jim, I'm going to turn to you next to give us a different perspective from Deluxe, looking across the industry from a solution provider. Love to hear your thoughts and hopefully spark even more questions from the audience to keep flowing in.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you, Angela. As many of the folks on this call understand, there are key objectives when you're trying to successfully move into a digital payment process. In this case, we're speaking, of course, of digital claims payments. And the next 10 minutes, I'd like to share about 4 of these key objectives that we try to follow with our clients, our carriers, at Deluxe Payment Exchange. These objectives have proven to be very successful for both carriers and customers alike. Although I think the priority changes when you move between different projects. But the first objective in digital transformation with insurance payments that we follow is customer satisfaction, and Angela spoke very directly about it. We can continually pose the question, does the proposed solution increase customer satisfaction? Another way to position it is to ensure that the benefits of, say, increased speed of delivery or increased security delivered in the digital solution, is it perceived by the customer as a benefit? And a lot of this work and thought process has to go in ahead of time while you're in that developmental process of creating or deciding on what digital solution to implement. We know that many of our clients, they measure customer satisfaction via net promoter scores, and she mentioned voice of the customer. The question is often asked, can you pinpoint an improved net promoter score to a digital delivery of a claims payment? And that's kind of hard to do. In fact, we've kind of found out that it's never really been graphically represented. But on the contrary, with follow-up questions in voice of the customer or on net promoter surveys, you may well find that a drop in customer satisfaction is due to a negative claims experience, due to the payment not being received in time, not being received at all, lost in the mail. So again, that first objective of customer satisfaction is really key to the basis of deciding how and which digital transformation to pursue first or in what order. The second objective that ranks high in importance with our customers behind customer satisfaction is the reduced cost of delivering the payment. And again, this all has to do with when you're going down this path, what do we do next? What can we do to help this migration? And according to industry statistics, of course, 80% of claims are still being made via paper checks. Paper checks are expensive, paper is expensive, this is very low security, and there's little to no delivery confirmation. We also know that costs can be reduced 50 to 99% by converting to a fully digital or some type of digital solution. And this cost reduction is one of the driving factors that we find in carriers' decisions to go that route. We found out that a solid strategy and a detailed process plan to migrate claims payments is crucial to delivering true cost reductions via digital migration. One of the key cost considerations in migrating claims payments to a digital solution, and Angela touched on this a little bit, is how expensive it is to onboard a customer or convert a customer or to migrate a customer. Let's think of an example. So let's say on average you're paying 1.25 claims in a life cycle of a claimant, and you decide to look at ACH or move to ACH. Well, if the ACH payment onboarding process costs $5, then your basis for those 1.25 claims in the life cycle of that claimant is $4. And that really is like, that stops you. And so in the cost consideration for looking at digital payments, you've got to look at the full breadth of the process, meaning onboarding. To wrap it up, it's safe to say that in order to realize the attractive cost savings that digital transformation provides, you have to consider the full costs involved in the onboarding process. So that's why that's our second objective, because quite often the driving force is to lower costs, but you got to look at your true and total costs. So the third objection that ranks really highly in our digital transformation programs is to ensure that the solution is as non-disruptive as possible. Non-disruptive is kind of an important term. I don't even know if it's a word, but trying to be non-disruptive. We ask ourselves on the carrier, will you have to rewrite major programs? Will you have to rewrite IT flows? Will you have to be involved in really in-depth major development projects? So that's a really key question to say, how disruptive will introducing this new solution be? Additionally, you got to keep that objective number one at customer satisfaction top of mind. And when you answer these questions, in most cases, you'll find that your internal IT support team, as Angela mentioned, it'll be critical to a successful implementation and deployment. In addition, when you work with your partner or partners, you need to ask the question, can there be a provision to begin with a proof of concept rather than going all in? We found that a proof of concept based on type of payment, for example, total loss payments, or a proof of concept based on a particular line, gives a pretty good case, a pretty good ability for you to take a look at how this process will work when you roll it out. And enabling that proof of concept first helps lower your risk. It provides a test and learn environment, which can prove pretty beneficial when rolling out the solution to larger groups of policyholders. So an eye toward being as non-disruptive as possible can go a long way toward delivering a successful digital transformation or digital migration. Fourth objective. The fourth objective is to be sure you've researched and cataloged metrics of success. Have we improved the claims process lifecycle in the eyes of the policyholder? Have we decreased the time from FNOL to the receipt of the claim by the policyholder? And how well do we communicate the change to the digital method to our policyholders? You know, did we tell them ahead of time what was going to happen? Did we tell them what they could expect? And then after we did it and they experienced the solution, did we reinforce with them what the benefits were and how well they got it? So we find that metric of success being set up ahead of time is really important. And once you establish those metrics of success, it'll help provide an oversight, more oversight and more control over the migration process, because you have in mind, oh, here's what we think is going to be successful. And as things morph, you realize, hey, this is really not going to increase the customer satisfaction. It's not going to really be as big a cost benefit as we thought. And so keeping these metrics of success in mind can keep the program or the process in order and guide you through it. So, well, we found that by assisting carriers in keeping these four objectives in top of mind, migrating to a digital solution can really be a win-win situation for all. So thanks for your time. And again, we're scheduled to answer your questions in the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes of program. So please submit them during that Q&A section.
Thanks, Jim. Well, we did get a bunch more questions during that bit, so it's good. There's more for us to dig into. John Thornton, love to turn to you and hear some thoughts from Westfield.
Yeah, well, clearly digital transformation is one of the hottest topics in our industry right now, and you know, from my network, and it seems like everybody's at a different stage with it, or with certain capabilities that are all part of it. But we're really similar to Angela. You know, we're focused on trying to remove the effort, the friction that the customers are experiencing. So at the Guidewire conference recently, there was a great presentation. It's out, I think it's out for consumption, but it's called The Friction Hunter. And kind of moving that concept through the organization, where back to, you know, even Angela's opening comments, if we don't build these things around the customer's perspective, you know, what are we really doing? So, and what I'm finding, and I'm sure this is shared, is that you know, the demands on the claims organizations are significantly increasing. You know, our business partners need a significantly lower LAE. The customer, to Angela's point earlier too, we're comparing ourselves to Amazon, Zappos. Even I was thinking how engaged I became with my Starbucks app when it was gamified for the loyalty, and I look forward to those next opportunities. There's all kinds of options we have there, right? But it's all about cheaper, better, faster, and none of this is easy. It's I think the payments piece, or just the overall digital transformation, is the top, or at least one of the top priorities for every carrier. And we're in the middle of kind of that, the challenges of an MVP. We're all about also trying to deliver an MVP agile deployment, while there's this notion of digital patience. So I'm sure many people have heard about this, but basically you have about 40% of consumers abandoning a website if the page takes 3 seconds to load. Site usability and fine tuning that before exposing it to a customer, that kind of worries me at night as we're developing this with that MVP mindset and thinking through how patient the customers are for those user experiences. I think continuous usability monitoring is key to any of these strategies, and I'm trying to look through my notes too, and not to duplicate some of the conversation, but I think that's a significant part of whatever strategy you put together to when you're deploying it, is making sure that's being monitored. We were really looking at, without a lot of funding, by the way, we were competing with other IT resources at the time. We were looking at what are the foundational capabilities we can deploy that's going to get us towards this holy grail that everyone's marching towards, the fully digital, straight through process claim. And actually, that's how I met Brian in a former relationship. But I mean, we knew we needed a fraud model. We knew we needed digital payments, e-signature, customer texting, those type of capabilities that will enable this digital experience and fully automated claims. So it was a big part of our roadmap. And I was also doing some research, and Jim mentioned it, but the paper checks, let's just say it's the most expensive and slowest method. Why are we still doing it? There's a lot of reasons I think we are. And again, I think it comes down to IT resources. They're limited. Info security and compliance internally is, they're going to make sure that we're secure and we're making the right decisions there. I don't think you could ever involve those other stakeholders in your organizations too early when you start on these projects. It was also a really big change management initiative, and I'm so glad we went to our finance partners early on also. The current, whoever your banking relationship is going to be their natural choice, and that's where they're comfortable. That's, and reconciling is not something to mess up in the process. So we when we think about it, I mean, we deployed our payment solution in early March 2020. So as much as we would like to say it was just a strategic decision, we just lucked out that right before COVID, we went live with it, and it really helped us through that challenging time with, the postal delays, the typical check process that's already pretty brutal was terrible throughout that. So, and we do see customer adoption increasing. There was a recent JD Powers I think it was a property claim study, and it says that the preference for electronic payments is up 60% over the past 5 years, but the use of physical checks is only down 10%. So this is a hot area that I think everyone's seeing. Now we we have seen since March, so we're over a year in, and we had kind of a slow rollout, but we're well over 50%, usually around 60% of our payments are digital. And the biggest hurdle that took us a little longer was multi-pay checks. So I mean, most of our claim payments, and this, you know, everybody has this, they're not just to the customer a lot of times. So getting that, you know, that detailed process worked out was definitely something that was a challenge. And you know, it's working. It's not perfect, but I do think it's good to get something out there and start working with it. I mean, it's not really a poor customer experience, but what we find is sometimes getting vendors into the program, some of that support's offshore, and it's not necessarily the best customer experience. So for vendors, but yeah, so we're about over 60% of that. We think the tracking and monitoring of that is key. So we are able to use our survey tool. Our net promoter score is extremely high, but then we have anytime we have a new strategic initiative, we try to take a slice of the claims that involve that technology. So when we use our texting program, you know, we're able to pull that slice out of the data, and it's, you know, it's double-digit improvement when that's involved, and we're seeing the same type of trends with the payments. Obviously, Jim, you gave a lot of great ways to build the business case around these efforts. It's all about cycle time and you know, how fast we can get the first payment out from FNOL. So I think that was a great build. And then you know, because of the way that tool works, we're able to see the performance, you know, of some of the claims professionals or teams. You know, some of that, it takes a little reinforcement if we can measure and monitor based on, you know, some of our professionals or the teams they're on, and then we can spend time in a team meeting and kind of highlight the program before it you know, it's always best to be positive rather than make it a performance issue. But I mean, it's an expectation when we put these programs out there to have utilization. So I think that support is also key. I'm sure we have a lot of questions. I didn't want to duplicate any of the content, so this is a great topic.
It's the
so
tough
I'm glad
tough
to be
part
here.
of going
Thanks.
last, John. But I appreciate you going through and trying to pick out what not just some unique points, but actually you brought some real stats from your own experience and bringing some of these solutions out. And you guys must have looked really kind of fortune teller-ish in when you started to bring the payments out. Is thank goodness you pulled the trigger when you did. It's good timing. Thank you to everyone. And we do have a lot of questions. Probably more than we can get to already, but I'm going to keep scanning through them to make sure if there's a juicy one that we jump on it. I did want to start with one that it's actually two questions. Two different people asked something similar around this notion of there's a couple different analogies used. One is the Henry Ford comment of you ask customers what they want and you end up building a faster horse. And then, you know, skating to where the puck will be. So Angela, you opened with this voice of the customer, you know, customer-centric view of what is it we need to do. John, you talked about touching on not just the end customer, but there's lots of other people who are being paid or interacted with in different ways. You know, we have vendors, we have the police in some cases. There's lots of different constituents that need to matter in the solutions that we put out there. And just helping one of them doesn't necessarily fix the overall issue that we're trying to address. Given that there's so many different constituents and people don't, you know, it's not their job to dream up a better way of handling a claim. They're sharing that the horse is too slow, so to speak. How do we move from just making, you know, kind of turning up the volume on the particular thing that they're experiencing and that's framing their mind of what they ask for, to thinking more strategically about kind of, you know, what could we do if we weren't just wedded to the way we've been doing it and trying to do it a little bit better. Angela, if we can start with you and how you've sort of navigated that taking the voice of the customer and turning it into a strategic improvement in the overall picture, not just, faster, louder, so to speak.
No, I love this question. I think, I saw a couple flavors of it as they were coming in, and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad somebody's asking about this. So definitely, I think this is a little bit of a, darn if you do, darn if you don't, right? So I think you always have to balance, right? Like what you're asking and trying to solicit feedback on, and then the educational piece of this. So I think that a lot of times, we're not hearing what we expect to hear in our surveys because if you go through an experience, you're not necessarily thinking about, there's a lot of grievances along the way, sometimes, right, up until payment. So I think it's point in time of what somebody at times either passionate about when they're answering a survey, or what they just don't know is even available, right? So we definitely have at times an older persona that we're at times dealing with. And when you think about traditional life products and beneficiaries, right, at time of claim, I know we've done studies in the past with the average age, but I can tell you the average age is not 30, right? So, in terms of just personas and what customers want, a lot of times it's education. John, you had mentioned, I find it absolutely fascinating in this day and age that somebody still wants me to mail them $1 million check, that they think that is safer than me putting it in their checking account directly, right? Like, it blows my mind,
Right.
I can't remember the last time I walked in and signed a check and like handed it to a teller. I seriously can't. And I actually don't trust my phone. I trust like an EFT transaction. So I think it's a very individual, right, thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, it is on us at times to kind of lead the dance, and so one of the things that I think I'm super pumped about with our latest version of vision for our beneficiaries is starting with the policyholders and starting to educate them of what do they need to know about that actually happens at time of claim, because of course they will no longer be here, right? And what do we offer, and what does a good experience, what would they want a good experience to look like for their beneficiaries? When we think about estate planning, estate planning itself has evolved so much because of technology, because of the era that we're in. So what we're starting to do now is think about what are the materials and the experiences need to start with at time of policyholder, because that's why they're buying these products, right? So when I think about like how that translates into informing us, right, of what their expectations are, that should transpire into better capabilities, right? So the ability at times, for example, not just the different types of people, like having a policy assigned to the funeral home, in our instance, right? But having, a multifaceted experience where maybe part of their wishes is to have a new policy purchased, for the next generation, right? And so you start to get into kind of like products and services and features, and no longer just traditional kind of ways of looking at it's an EFT, it's a check, it's a Venmo payment, right? Maybe it's a split, and maybe some money's going out the door and some money's being retained and potentially reinvested, right? So I think there's definitely a leading the dance role that we need to play here, because they don't always know what they want, right?
Yeah. And you need to be able to respond to that. The whole, like, the check is more secure, and then someone will say the exact opposite. Like, just had that conversation this weekend with my in-laws, so that hit home. The two of them feel very differently about the same thing, so it's an interesting one, even in the same household, which of course one of them is the policy owner and one is the beneficiary, and then roles reversed in the other way. So how do you navigate that? How do you make sense of those kinds of those feelings? Or John, when you mentioned having multiple payees, maybe those payees feel differently about how they want to get the money. And do you inherently force one down the path of the other because that's the solution that you have, or you didn't really foresee these things going into it, and then once you added multiple payee, you're backed into a corner, so to speak. So you might be solving one person's needs while creating a problem for the other person. Is that something you contend with as well? Or how do you kind of navigate the voice of the customer versus faster horse conundrum?
Where I found some discipline around this was using our business architects, and that discipline to how we actually we have some customer journey maps, and you get everyone into a very collaborative environment, and you really do map all of these interactions that take place in the process. And so we kind of been using that framework, and I feel like that, along with customer journey analytics behind it, so that that's where that constant measuring and monitoring comes, is where we've gotten better at, I would say, that customer centricity.
Yeah, not an
And that's
easy
a
dance.
continual process.
Yeah.
No.
Jim, you guys end up on the delivery side of those upfront conversations and the sort of the strategy of how do we balance this out versus, our customer asks for this, but they don't necessarily see what it could be. Or are we now on the side of we're going to tell them what they want, and that's not the right answer either? How do you see navigating that? And is that an issue that you would help customers with, or carriers with, I should say?
Yes, and you started with the right answer last, and that is that as consultants, we are not telling them what to do. We have to be collaborative and take all the pieces that are coming from the areas that Angela and Jon just mentioned, so that when you evaluate what the possible solutions are, what really fits into that particular carrier's result of the collaboration that Jon just said, and it changes between different carriers who have different philosophies about it. But what we do find is that once you get to that point where all those ideas have been shared, we realize that the success, at the end of the day, the success, the adoption rates, the implementation rates are directly driven by how well the internal stakeholders bought into it. Give you an example. One of our solutions is the digital check, the e-check, and we start with proof of concepts often, but when the claims adjusters as a whole, speak of them as an entity, when they see and they realize the benefits that they're hearing from the claimants, and when they buy into that solution, then suddenly adoption skyrockets. It's like, that's magic. How'd that happen? Well, because the delivery folks, the folks that are internal stakeholders, have realized, well, the customer said this thing is great. So therefore, they're starting to position that in their suggestions or recommendations to both the policyholders and to the internal stakeholders, and say, we should push this a little more because here's what I'm hearing. So getting that internal buy-in and internal commitment from internal stakeholders, especially those that are customer facing, really has a lot to do with how successful the program's going to be.
And I imagine those people also have that kind of at the coal face experience of what the customers are feeling, asking for, needing, where they're getting frustrated, to see. But are they buying in because they see it as a true solution to a problem that they're facing every day on their customers' behalf?
On the contrary, if the delivery folks, the customer facing folks, are being coached or told this is what we're going to do,
Yeah.
and then they're starting to see not quite that enthusiasm from the customer or even pushback from the customer, then suddenly the whole thing starts to collapse inside of their internal thought processes. And
Yeah. I want to go back to Jim, as a point you made on POCs, and then Jon, you brought it up when you talked about rolling out your digital payment solution starting in March. And yeah, I'm cheating because I saw he rolled out something else. But we think about the small scale rollout moving to full scale and that decision point. And actually, this has come up in a few. I'm glad someone asked it here, because it's come up in a few webinars. Is how do you figure out your rollout strategy when you are changing the way things work, not just internally? Our front facing staff can put a screen over whatever's changed for them, and hopefully it doesn't affect the customer. But this does affect customers. It does affect our partners, hopefully in a good way. But how do you figure out the balance between the sense that this is a good thing, we need to get this out, so let's launch it, versus yes to all that, and we need to balance learning and doing it right? And is it just that we're going too slow as an industry again, or are we pushing it too fast and maybe missing the chance to build it a better way? Jon, I want to start with you, but this balance between getting a solution out full force. And of course, a lot of us had to do that in the past 18 months or so, versus how do you make that decision that we're going to do this in a measured way or in a piece of the business and learn? And what does that decision process look like? And how do you build a bigger rollout if you do it small to start? Jon, you're on mute, which I'm sure everything you're saying is brilliant, but we can't hear it. There we go.
I can't believe. So I think it's situational. And a lot of times it depends on maybe where the business case is and where we're trying to drive either more benefit quicker or not. And so we kind of tackle it by volume. So, we have most of our claims are auto. Sometimes we roll out to the auto group first. Sometimes if maybe we think there's more risk, we keep it into a smaller rollout and maybe start with a smaller segment. We had a big challenge with COVID. Our chief claims officer said, I want customer texting, in 90 days, which we typically can't even get an RFP done that fast. So, and we did, and we just weren't able to integrate it fully. So, I mean, I think there's times that pushing yourself and accepting some of those challenges is a good thing to get, especially when it's something that's so beneficial to a customer. It's not really that challenging. It's just, let's give the front line that extra tool. We could work around it not being integrated for a little while we got that IT prioritized, and it into the plan. So, I really do think it depends on the change management plan. And that's always big with this, because it does touch with payments, especially. It's change management with a customer. It can be very positive, but it's a big process change for the adjusting staff. And, I don't think you can ever underestimate that effort with the amount of change that we're putting on the frontline adjusters these days is amazing, and there's times that I'm sure they want to just, give us all a slap across the face sometimes about, how much change we're implementing. So I think it's important to get them involved early and get some key frontline stakeholders involved so they can help spread the message of why we're doing this and how it benefits everyone. But yeah, I think it's situational is the best answer on the rollout strategy, depending on what you're trying to get out of it when.
Yeah. Can I just add something to that, just because I feel like there's such a relevant example that we're living right now. And even though it's more in the claim submission wheelhouse, I think I can definitely see it's playing itself out. So similar model, we're agile. It's always about MVP, and you got to start somewhere when you start building a process, right? Kind of end to end. But I think one of the lessons that we are learning right now, and I really do hope we learn it and maintain it, right, as we move forward, is I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, are we taking a step backwards with something that we're rolling out? Because the way that we have to kind of chunk it out, right? So when we think about MVP, right, that's always where's the line in the sand, right, of what we're kind of compartmentalizing. The example that I have is really around, the perception of a digital experience, right? So in this case, we were using smart forms, right? And smart forms, we made it as there was an external solution we were using, but from a customer perspective, it's digital, right? They get it by email, they fill it out, they send it right back to us. They don't need to print anything, they don't need to scan anything, upload it, all that jazz, right? When you're building now a digital experience that's about data collection, right? And kind of moving through pages, right? Web pages, you got to draw a line and stand somewhere. And I get that. But from a customer perspective, we've put like administrative burden back on their plates. And sure enough, right, within like the first, 30 days of rollout, we're hearing it on the survey, right? And so it's not just a matter of asking the question up front, are we taking a step backwards? And let me tell you, we had the conversation and we brokered, we hedged our bets. We said, we feel like we got to start somewhere. We're going to try to evolve this as fast as possible. But then things get in the way of that, right? And so I think you have to have some guardrails and process to say how long is too long. And it really starts to impact your voice of customer scores. How long are you willing to let that happen before you can advance, and now the customer feels like that's no longer an issue, that detractor's been taken off the table. So I think this cannot be a unique problem at MassMutual. I think that this is, when you're working in agile versus waterfall, it is bound to happen. But I think we're now starting to establish, like, what are the right questions from a customer experience perspective should we be asking ourselves as we really align and agree on MVP and what the next release looks like.
Yeah, I think that is really well said. Thank you for that last phrase is critical. And for both of you, there is no single answer to this. You have to have the right strategic kind of mindset and framework that you take to each of those situations. Jim, you brought up this, the kind of POC, control it, learn, get it right before you go live, make sure you know the change management bits that you need to have in place to manage it. We are throwing a lot at the adjusters constantly. Even if it's good stuff, it's still change. What's your take on this question of drawing that line between, doing something in a small controlled way versus, like, this has a lot of benefit, our customers are asking for it, we need to make the change to roll it out?
Right. It flows back. John hit it spot on. The primary consideration is risk, and that is risk to either other scheduled programs that IT has to handle, or the risk to your MVP or your net promoter scores, and all that seems to be the driving factor from the decision-making process at the top. As it goes down toward those to the claims adjusters, to those that are customer facing, then it becomes a performance situation. What do you anticipate this is going to do to your current communication flows, to your current processing times, to your current to the number of comments or phone calls you're getting either in support or in objection to the new solution? So risk is first. The second has to do with risk to other internal processes and individuals. But as far as we're concerned, because we're only in the payment side, we're not in the claims filing position that Angela just described. But again, having those people understand why you're doing this, and it's for the success of the business and for the success of our customers, getting that through. And then when you go into a proof of concept, the folks are buying into it. It's like, we didn't foist this on you. We designed this solution, and now we're giving it a chance to test it. And so we're going to need your feedback, but we're also going to need your positive commitment to making it work. And hopefully, as Angela said, if you've done all that work ahead of time, set up your metrics for success, you kind of have an idea of how this will be accepted instead of just being thrown out there. But yeah, the key is, in our position, is those frontline communications, either in person or via electronic modes to the customers, and being able to monitor them.
No, I think it goes to a point John made about building that coalition internally. It's the adjusters or whoever the frontline staff is going to be doing it, but finance, IT, the product side, the P&L owners who are ultimately going to be impacted by whatever happens to the loss ratio as a result of this. Hopefully it's positive.
Right, but let me add one more thing though. In the proof of concept idea, you're right. You're lowering your risk because you're not going all in, so to speak. But you also have to look internally, because IT will come back and say, well, in order for us to do a POC and then a rollout, if you will, or to move this amongst different lines, that's going to be double or triple the work. And so that will come back to you in a real negative way too, if you don't allow for it or don't understand it going in. So.
Yeah, you need to get those senses, and depending on the solution, maybe it's outside of payments, but maybe it's less work. If you work out the bugs before IT was really involved, maybe there's ways to test things offline or without the integration.
Right.
So you de-risk it up front, because that's where that contingency bucket in the IT project is where a lot of us can get bitten. So that's a good point.
But you're also trying to solve a problem. Back to what Angela said, going to the electronic form for claim submission. I'll submit that had to do with the circumstances she was under. The mail service was certainly slowed back during COVID, during the height of the pandemic, and so what they needed to get done couldn't be done. So the circumstances around it had changed. So therefore, they had to get this thing out and get it going. So therefore, they did what they had to do.
I kind of touching on that. I think we have time for 2 questions, but they're going to be shorter ones. But yeah, I think Jim, I don't know if this will apply to you because you're in a particular piece of this puzzle, but I'll certainly give you a chance to answer this as well. Angela, I want to start with you, but there's a question that's sort of hinting at the reductionist mindset. So is it just payments? Is it just first notice? Is it just whatever? What is there a thing that should be the top of the priority list? And if so, what is it? Or the challenge I would have to the question is that not how we get to operate? We can't just solve for, and obviously I'm saying it in a certain way that implies I have a position
You're
on this,
leading
but
the witness. You're leading the witness. Yeah.
Feel free to disagree with me. That's fine.
No, I don't disagree at all. I think that is honestly, like for me, the kryptonite of building a good digital process is it's end to end. We don't get to just pick and choose which one we want to be great at, right?
Yeah.
I think that, to me, it is a big part of when when you guys reached out and I learned more about the forum is I'm like, I'm going to have a really hard time talking about just payment because yes, it is, it is the caboose, right? It is why we're here at the end of the day. It is, right. It is ultimately what they invested, years, with the company for, but it really is, everything that leads up to it, and there's just, from a get it done perspective of get it done as fast as you can, but get it done right and make me feel great throughout the process, right? So meet me where I am, right? And that could be probably, if you journey map that, like 30 different places, right? So I definitely, for me, it's about looking at the whole package. And I guess from a maturing capability perspective, it's making sure that you can keep that as even throughout the process so that from a customer standpoint, they're not saying, wow, it was really great when I first started out, but like, man, I got into like the paperwork part of it and I'm like, oh, right. So you really, to me, I would want them to be evaluating a customer experience as evenly as possible.
Yeah. The digital cliff that we need to avoid. They just fall off.
Yeah.
John,
yeah.
is that your take on this as well?
It is. I think we didn't have the funding and claims for the full digital portal right off the bat. So I had that in the future. So what I was trying to do while waiting for that was build these capabilities as fast as I could that I knew were foundational. So as soon as we kind of had that bow on the package of the digital portal, because we had a corporate digital experience taking place. So I knew claims wasn't going to lead. So our team, we looked at it, let's build the foundation of the house. And now we're right in that part to actually put the whole end to end together. But we have all the building blocks ready so that we probably just came at it, probably a different approach. It seems to have worked well for us. We were able to do all of that with our annual IT budget. So we didn't require additional funding to get any of that done, which is key. And that's why perhaps we didn't want to sit around and wait. So we did what we could and we tried to prioritize the capabilities that we knew we're part of that roadmap. We have our plan, we have our roadmap and strategy, and we just didn't have funding for a large program at the time because so many other large initiatives were taking place. So
yeah. But I appreciate not waiting and saying, yeah. But there are some carriers who are working on that big thing, and so everything else is on hold until then. And I think a lot of them had rude awakenings in the past year and a half that you can't just sit and wait, and that's maybe open them to the opening notion that was brought up here that
and you don't have to. I mean, yeah.
And it's not just other insurance companies that
to the customer they might, I was trying to think through it. Ours don't necessarily have this fully digital experience that we're looking for yet. And we know that's coming quickly, but to their point, the most important things, which is keeping in touch with what's going on in the claim, and if they're texting their customers and their adjusters and they're getting paid electronically. Those have been huge wins,
Yeah.
for that customer experience. So
yeah. Jim, what's your take? I know you've got a horse in this race, but do you think that it does payments can be a priority and be part of a bigger picture, or should we be breaking off one piece at a time?
Always has to be part of the big. It has to be a part of the picture. It's not the, and as Angela said, this is the final touch, if you will, for that particular policy or that particular claim. So I think that a lot of what firms like Angela's and John's are doing upfront builds into that. So the payment part is only a touch, but again, it can be can leave a real bad taste in folks' mouths if it doesn't happen the way that they're expecting it. But I think the foundational stuff that's being done ahead of time has a lot to do with how that perception, how that claimant perceives that final touch.
Yeah. All right, we've got 5 minutes, which is not a lot of time, but I do want to see if we can maybe rapid fire this one. A great question on what challenges have surprised you most when digitizing aspects of the claims process. Are there things that, I mean, John, you sort of set it up with saying, we're asking a lot of change, or we're putting a lot of change on our associates in various roles, not just the adjusters, but we're here talking about claims, even if it's for good reasons, it's still changed. So, maybe that's one of the surprises, but are there things that we thought it's making things better, smoother, faster, cheaper, and this was a surprise. We weren't expecting that as we went on this digital journey. I'm curious if there's something that's come up in your processes that's maybe giving you that pause or a surprise. Anyone can jump in first. I don't want to point and shoot in this one if you have to think through them, but I will if I have to.
I'll give you a knee-jerk one since the clock is going to burn quickly. Yeah. I think for me, it's again, experience obviously matters here. So in the disability world, we collect a lot of information up front. And, one of the things that we just didn't even think to question or think about was, and I'm like, oh man, I've been burned by this before, like on other, personal websites. And it definitely is a really crappy moment, is the ability to save. So, when you're in a time of crisis, right, whether it's any type of claim, you are like collecting data from everywhere, right? And you're probably swearing under your breath at times and you're already frustrated, right? And you get, you're now, you got this great online data collection experience and you get halfway through and the kid cries, the dog barks, you get distracted, you come back 20 minutes later and
time out. Yeah. Yikes.
So that's recent experience that obviously does require working closely with IT to say, what can we do here? But the ability to save information, I didn't realize when I just said, hey, let's fix this, the 42 questions I would get back with all the things we now need to think about and consider, right? With risk of saving information and how long are we going to archive it and all this stuff, right? So something you just take for granted. We're learning as we go.
Oh, that's a great one. And I think everyone suddenly, once you explain it, was like, oh my God, I've had that happen.
Yeah.
So frustrating. Yeah. John, what about yourself? Mute. The mute has been the big surprise, I think, for all of us the past year and a half.
It's the two main things: IT info security. Bring them in early. Finance, bring them in early, especially on a payment project. I loved Angela's point about that, the saving, that a lot of that user experience that I'm sure your IT units have, but user experience testing everything is key.
That's great. Jim, you get to have the final word. What are some of the surprises?
Quick.
Yeah.
I mentioned it before, but once the claim, the most surprising thing to us was once the claim agents realized that a new solution was the best way to go for the claims, the adoption of the customers went crazy, skyrocketed. It was something we kind of thought of. You have to make sure that those claims adjusters are on it. But once they realized that their enthusiasm just takes the program and suddenly we're getting calls from carriers, we got to get out of this POC and roll this thing out right now. It's like, oh, okay. And it was all because the adoption of the internal stakeholders. And in this case, it's claims adjusters.
Yeah.
That was a big aha for us.
Right. Even that kind of it depends or situational point even applies to what we thought was going to happen, and then be open to the fact that maybe our associates are ready to move on something, or we thought this was going to be a non-issue. And you know what? Actually, once we got in there, they needed some more hand-holding, or our customers did, or partners, et cetera. So that dynamicism and how we roll things out, maybe that's how we keep that superior customer experience front and center, is not locking ourselves in, having a path, but also having the humility, if you will, to stay open to what we learn along the way. Thank you to everyone. Fantastic panel. Angela, Jon, Jim, great discussion today. Thank you to all of our attendees. We still have, I don't know, 18 unanswered questions, and they're still coming in. So I think that shows that this was resonating. So thank you to everyone. Really great conversation, and hopefully that helps move the industry forward. And we get to see everyone virtually in November for Connected Claims USA.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.